This hangout is live. Let's go ahead and get us up to slideshow. Share that screen. Hide that little button. We're good to go. I hope.
Good evening, everyone. Our royal crew of folks, thank you for coming again. Tonight's lecture is the 7th in the series. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Bernie Kahn, who is a native of Orlando, born and raised in Orlando, believe it or not. He's a local dentist with a very boutique-like practice, does only the finest work, and also very active in local civic associations, and helps us as our floor gabbai during services, and likes to teach. So here's your opportunity. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me all right? Yes, I'm used to teaching. I teach with some regularity down at the vocational school in Orlando, as well as at dental events. I teach dental practitioners aspects of what we call occlusion, and occlusion is how your jaws come together. And it's an interesting science, but this is a science of smiling, to say the least. This is loving kindness. And I'm thrilled to be here on Lucky 7, because that's the way my dice roll. Chesed is a quality of Judaism that surrounds everything in the service. You'll see repetition on and on and on and on. And what this little, hopefully, I'll go back. There we are. Thank you. Learning the equipment here. My overview for Chesed, we will talk about things within the Torah. We'll talk about things during services. We'll see applications, historical examples, as well as calendar and life cycle events. There will be a handout for everyone afterwards, and I want you to appreciate that there is so much on the topic of Chesed that even though I have these examples in these areas that we will go into, there will be many resources for you to look up if you so desire. So as a literal definition, Chesed is loving kindness, and it is a virtue on its own in respect to the quality of life to make the world a better place. Some leading rabbis have said it is the foundation of all the commandments, and it's essentially from the first to the last word of the Torah. There are many examples of loving kindness expressed within the Torah, and what I've chosen for you is the different qualities that I consider when I think of love. And primarily I see the love between man and woman, and we're all aware of Genesis 29, line 18, where Jacob grew to love Rachel, and his love was so significant that even though he worked for Laban for 7 years, it was like nothing, because his anticipation for being with Rachel. And everybody's aware of the story of Samson and Delilah, where there is a very active expression of love. Then, of course, there's considerations between man and fellow men. And in that, we see to it to appreciate that we love our neighbor as ourself, so to speak. There's a consideration that we all put to people we meet for the first time, as well as carry on a relationship with. Leviticus talks about there's loves that are forbidden, and that could go on, but the thing that's of significance is that the stranger among us should be given honor and treated kindly. And it all boils down to the fact that you should love this stranger as yourself, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then there's the love, of course, between man and God. And in Deuteronomy, it states that you shall love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And of course, this is repeated so frequently with the V'ahavta. And so another example is within the liturgy is the Song of Songs. And this was supposedly written by Solomon, and it is a rite of spring, so to speak, in a time where flowers come to blossom, springtime is in the air, and I've heard it considered to be an analogy to Sadie Hawkins Day, where the ladies get to choose the men, so to speak, at the dance. But it is recited at the intermediate Shabbat of Passover, and it deals with the promise of rebirth of life. Any questions concerning that at all? There are significantly other examples within the liturgy, and what I want to point out to everyone is a Talmud expression that Chesed is the highest form of service of God. It's a service out of love in contrast to service out of fear. And so what we attempt to do is step forward with the open hand, so to speak, to greet and welcome. So there are, as I said, numerous other examples, and again, hopefully you'll find the opportunity to study further. In liturgical examples, again, throughout our service, you'll see elements of the same. Ahavat Yisrael, there's an all-embracing love comprehending all Jews. And again, one of the most significant elements in Friday night service is L'cha Dodi. We all stand to welcome the bride of Shabbat. There isn't anything associated with a wedding ceremony that isn't of expression of love. And also Ahavat Olam, where we express the everlasting love that God has for Israel. I feel like I'm racing. So again, what we read in the text, what we read in the liturgy, that we keep words of love. I heard the other day that Selma, the name of the town, is a transliteration of shalom. And being that the other day was Martin Luther King Day, and also the photos that were all over the internet with the March from Selma, here's another example of Chesed. And then we started going into all the different Kaddishes and the Kaddish Shalem, and all this is a proclamation of adoration. We lean on the pillar of the strength of love toward God. And again, we see to it to do so in the Amida, all the Amidas. And again, it's our opportunity to create a oneness with God in a communal setting, as well as on your own at home. But the loving kindness is sustained in the living. And I'll show you contrast to that later on, because loving kindness can also sustain the appreciation for those deceased. So all the different Kaddishes that we recite during the Shabbat service, as well as all of the other services. So plenty of examples for you to look up.
Do you think there's a reason why, especially for tefillah, for prayer, that this concept of chesed is so common?
I would tell you that it's a pillar, that it's 180 degrees from fear. And there's so much to be fearful of, but you can overcome your fear through love of God, love of fellow man, and you're the person to whom you have a relationship. We hug on each other, and it gives us strength. Hugs are better than drugs, right? Yeah. So another example for the liturgy is Yitzker, and significantly there, Yitzker as a solemn occasion causes the individual praying to have strength and energy to commit acts of kindness, loving kindness, in the name of the person they lost. So when you do an act of kindness, you are remembering that individual or those individuals. So Yitzker creates in words the solemn occasion of remembering their death, but at the same time, it commits loving kindness. Because once you commit that act, you're remembering those individuals. And again, all the prayers associated with burial evolve around that same concept.
By the way, I should point out, if you come to services, you will see that we have extra copies of our Yisker booklet that you are welcome to take home, which gives readings and reflections in addition to the formal Yisker service. So if you would like to check up on this at home in the privacy and more relaxed atmosphere, please feel free to take one of them. They say Bond of Life on the cover.
And that booklet comes into some significance on the typically the Sunday between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where we have Kever Avot, the service at the cemetery. And again, to take a read in that, it's significant because it's, again, building that pillar of love.
Just one question, Bernie.
Certainly.
Why do you think we have Yizkor, these memorial prayers for our loved ones and the martyrs of our history, recited on our happiest holidays, on these days that otherwise would be so joyful? Well,
again, just like the rite of spring, the harvest occurs. And so this is when things are of most plenty. And again, all of the harvest festivals were the most communal events of the ancient times. And so this is where you didn't see your second cousin for 3 months, that sort of thing. And so together you commemorate. And at least this is what I gather. I'm sure you might have something to add or no. So people come together for the harvest celebrations. So Simon the Just teaches us that the world rests on 3 things: Torah, service to God, and bestowing kindness. And our example of that is Bechur Holim, which is, of course, visiting the sick. I used to be much more active in that, and it was a matter of creating an identification process at the hospital, and then I would go and deliver the mini challahs and offer people the opportunity to speak about what's going on and if I could do anything for them as far as contacting people, and at the same time give them some mishabera if they wish to do that. And it's an amazingly personally uplifting opportunity, because no matter how bad your week was, when you see these individuals, you realize just how lucky you are, And so, you could be in their shoes, and hopefully one day you wouldn't ever have to wear them. But by visiting the sick, of course, it's a mitzvah. And this is something that hopefully it's not something that you will be forced to do, but something you're willing to do. And of course, typically speaking, there is a prayer for illness that we do during the service after the 7th Aliyah, before the Maftir Aliyah, and that is also done at all Torah services in Central Florida, more commonly than not. Temple Israel was the first of the synagogues to do that, and we first started it by having everybody that wished to participate, instead of standing out in the congregation, everybody came up to the bima and had the Aliyah, the 7th Aliyah. However, it became logistically impossible relative to the numbers of people. And so I guess Ritual put their heads together and they came up with another process. And then I remember distinctly where the HIPAA laws came out, and you really can't tell somebody that somebody else is sick, but it's not the fact that you're saying what the parameters of their illness are, and at the same time you're not actually getting into personal stuff other than reading somebody's name or eliciting somebody's name. And of course, in addition to that, there's another prayer, a prayer for recovery, and then there's one's a return from illness, a return to good spirits, return for recovery. And then Birkat HaGomel, where you've had either specifically an aliyah or you're in one way or another recognized within the service, and the congregation says a blessing for you in respect to return from an issue where your life could have been at stake. But there's plenty more. And again, these are things that we see in larger communities as well as in this community. Temple Israel was blessed to have some amazing members that would be available, and they would be available to help out distressed families or the like. And today we have JFS. However, there's plenty of people that fall through the cracks. And the object of the game is to let somebody else know that you're in the situation before you're so stressed. But there are free loans and gifting in larger communities. At the same time, if you know somebody or whatever, you need to get by. But these are all acts of Chesed. And what I want to point out is Hevra Kadisha in the middle there, where, again, it's out of loving kindness that you take care of a body. And again, this is a major sacrifice for a lot of people, but what it does is it honors and respects the community. Haverim, commonly in synagogue situations, people within the congregation get together for whatever cause, whatever purpose socially, and typically speaking, there's some degree of study, there's some degree of understanding that is expressed. But in the state of Israel, there's numerous types of groups that do this. And I'm sure you've heard of Community Watch, Shomerim. Nothing's really new under the sun, even though they may have some interesting owl signs on the neighborhood, at least in Maitland. In Maitland, if there's a Community Watch district, there's a little owl sign as you go into that neighborhood, so somebody's watching you, so to speak. So this is what, to me, struck a real chord, because people used to come up to me and said, "Bernie, your grandfather was a Chassid." And I knew him to be a man of study, but Rabbi Similai in the Talmud claims the Torah begins and ends in Chesed, as I mentioned earlier, implying the entire Torah is characterized by loving kindness. It sets forth a vision of the ideal life whose goals and behavior is characterized by mercy and compassion. So the giving of the Torah is the quintessential act of Chesed. A person who embodies Chesed is a Chassid, faithful to the covenant above and beyond that which is normally required. So there was a Chassidim evolution through time, and it's the Chassid is really nothing really new, but it all comes from this same root word.
I can just point out for those of you that aren't 100% fluent with the Torah, when it talks about the Torah beginning and ending with Chesed, it talks about God's care for Adam and Eve, in particular giving them clothing when they were first naked, and then God's burial of Moses at the end of the Torah. So that's what Rabbi Simlai is trying to draw on, that one of the first things we see God doing in the Torah is clothing the naked, And one of the last things we see God doing in the Torah is burying the dead. And just as God busies himself with these acts of chesed, so too we should as well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Not everyone is as fluent in this.
So historical examples. There's significance throughout history with the earliest that I could research. The Sadducees claimed that the extinction of the soul occurs with death. And so it's a depressing sort of concept, but they created the concept of saying when it's over, so to speak. And the Pharisees pray by the 18 benedictions, which form the daily service, reviving the dead with mercy, as stated in the Amida. The one prayer where it starts out with Baruch Atah Adonai, but you don't bend the knee, and you don't bend the knee because we're uplifting, we're not bowing down. And there is a correlation of an individual who is unable to conceive, and then a woman who is not able to conceive is barren by description, and giving birth is to be analogous to a resurrection. The resurrection of Elijah, who foretells the coming Messiah, will be expected at our Passover table. So we're all asking him to come visit, and in hopes that he will announce that the Messiah is around the corner. And also it's explained that the righteous never really turn to dust, that they live forever. So my example of the Shoah as historic principles, the Holocaust, the Holocaust. My grandfather on my father's side was a member of Hitler's government in the early days, and he felt the handwriting. He knew what was happening. My father and his family, they all had to put on the yellow armbands, and they had things stolen from their house in the middle of the night, and they were living in a degree of stress. But my grandfather, for the fact that he was a member of government, had some credentials, and so he and others of his family felt, well, maybe this is going on, but they're not going to really come after our rear ends. They're not going to come after us. Well, in the middle of the night, in come the stormtroopers, and they take my grandfather away from my father and his family. And so my grandfather saw to it to fake a heart attack in his transportation to wherever he was being incarcerated. And so because he was who he was, they took him to the hospital instead. And in the hospital, he snuck out. And with just the jewelry on his hand, he was able to get into Czechoslovakia. And then from Czechoslovakia, he went to South America, Argentina. And in Argentina, he was able to send for my grandmother and my father and his two brothers and some of his sisters, my grandfather's sisters, and because all the husbands said it's not going to happen. And so he was able to get some of my aunts on a boat. They left from Hamburg. He intercepted the boat in Baltimore and got them off the boat, and immediately went to work for the United States government. And so The Shoah is close. It's if you were to go to the Holocaust Center here in Orlando, the doors and sculptures that are in there were all designed and made by my dad. And when I was a kid, I never heard he never broached the subject. And it wasn't until I was a senior in high school that my sister was having her junior year abroad, and my father and mom went to go visit. And when he came back, it was like, what? It woke up all of his history. And at that point in time, it was something he couldn't stop drawing. It wasn't he had to express himself in that fashion. But Rabbi Wittenberg from the Rabbinical Assembly created this, and I pulled this off the internet, where he states, "We have to live without answers. God remains inscrutable. The issue of God's justice is not coextensive with the question of faith, the issue of God's existence. One can believe in God without being able to understand or justify what happens to the world. The future will depend on how we answer and how our response will be measured by our actions, not only our beliefs. In the meantime, genocide continues, and our vow, never again, has so far proved insufficient to prevent it." So I don't mean to say that there's doom. We still have hope, but we shouldn't stop with issuing our loving kindness. Yes, Steve?
Next to the last one. How we answer, what's the question?
Why? Why the Shoah? Why us? Why were we so persecuted? And my answer to my acquaintances is there's some degree of jealousy. How is it that we can be happy when we never know what's coming from over there? Why is it that we can celebrate like we do? We used to have a manager of our synagogue by the name of Randa Martyr, and Randa's son Josh is a rabbi, and quite the modern Orthodox. And every once in a while, he has these things on the internet, and you see all these guys marching around in circles, dancing, and they're having a blast. And when you read about the topics of their discussion, you go, holy Toledo, how is it that they can be celebrating? And it's because they're loving life. If you didn't have the opportunity to discuss the horrible nature of things and then celebrate to relieve yourself of the stress. I hope I gave you.
And in many ways, the Shoah represents the antithesis of Chesed.
Oh yeah.
Although there were thousands of people who showed us kindness and who helped the Jews and others who were being persecuted to hide or to escape, the basic Nazi plan was to destroy the value we call Chesed in the world. If you read their writings, they believe that loving kindness, that being kind to those who are weak, is immoral. Literally immoral to be kind, because you're merely perpetuating weakness and you're holding back the rise of the Ubermensch, of the Superman. And we have this as a living reminder of what happens when you abandon Chesed as a key value for life. And it's one reason why this is part of this discussion for the show, for Chesed.
I don't know if you ever get a chance to run across the book Butterflies Are Free, and it's a very moving portrayal of children who drew and wrote in the concentration camps, and boy, did they have an attitude, and it's quite inspiring. You learn a lot from your grandkids, to say the least, and these children still had what it must be like on the other side of that fence in their attitude day in, day out. All right, so we can approach the calendar and our life cycle events. And again, a lot of these things I've already talked about. However, when it comes to aspects of Yartzeit, Yartzeit itself is a Yiddish term. It's year time, and a Yartzeit is 1 calendar year after the death of an individual that you're commemorating, and it's at that time that an unveiling would occur if there were a placard or the like. And the Yartzeits are annualized activities at a regular service or at home, and you do so by either lighting your candle, or at the same time we try to honor you by having an aliyah up on the bima for a Torah reading or a Torah ritual. Many people don't have at the tip of their tongue shloshim. Shloshim is the month after the death of a loved one. And essentially, there's no big hup to do. You're not necessarily in a status of reclusiveness, but it's a month of respectfulness. And a shiva is the name of a service relative to the commemoration of an immediate passing. And the most significant thing, really and truly, about it is the meals. Yes, there's a service, but there's a nosh. And so the nosh is a kindling of friendship, sharing something with somebody, have a bite of this, and it's a rejuvenation. Yes.
Doesn't Shiva, isn't that Yiddish for Sheva, the 7 days of mourning? There's the 1 day of the burial,
Mm-hmm.
and the 7 days, and the 30 days, and the
Yartzeit. Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Any other comments, questions? So, in respect to this concept of commemoration of death and at the same time considering what we do at Yartzeits and in the harvest holidays, in Judaism, we relegate the future to heaven and the glorious future centered upon the Mashiach, the blessed leader of the people to come to us, anointed and appointed by God. This is the personification of the 4-letter word hope. And we should always carry hope in our back pocket, to say the least. But at the same time, there are skeptics. Hillel was a skeptic. The Talmud says that all translations of Mashiach essentially is hope. And this hope allows us to persevere in the worst of times. And that'll lead you to my next presentation in a couple weeks of Nechsa. And what that is perseverance. We keep our act going with that hope. And so the Talmud leads us to believe that there may be a 7-year period, and again, 7 is a significant number in Judaism. This is the 7th lecture, and there is a potential for political unrest and bitter warfare. The map of the world, if you put a little light where all the weaponry is being shot today, the world is pretty lit up. So even though we may not hear about all the skirmishes and battles, they're omnipresent. And so the Talmud talks about reuniting tribes, the restoration of Jerusalem, and the reestablishment of the temple. There are people right now building. And so when the Mashiach comes, sin is to be abolished. There won't be any expiatory sacrifices. Sacrifices are well enumerated within the Torah, but Thanksgiving offerings will not cease, and the dead who were good will participate. If you step off the temple grounds and look to the south and towards the east, there's just huge burial grounds, and this is for people who are going to be in the leading line of the return. So prior to the messianic appearance, there's a predicted great pestilence, and those who are not worthy will no longer survive. However, the poor will never cease, and there are many differing opinions as to how long that period may last. And so that brings me to a hopefully rewarding end. But Chesed itself is loving kindness, as shown as I hopefully explained, and it leads us to a continued boundless relationship. May I answer any questions or expound upon other concepts? Yes, Nikki.
Previous screen about the,
Just scroll the wheel back.
I will.
is that from the Tanakh or is that from the Talmud?
I would tell you it's from the Talmud.
Yeah. I mean, the Tanakh itself is very parsimonious with its terms of the end of days. So Daniel, yes, talks a little bit about it, although Daniel is not officially within the section of Nevi'im because it's too hard to understand what he's talking about. But from among the prophets, there are references to the end of days, references to the resurrection, references to the turmoil, and then the peace. The details are debated in the Talmud, and this is a good summary of the majority opinion. But unfortunately, we're going to have to wait until the end to see exactly how this unfolds.
Isn't there some discussion about we can do it the hard way or the easy way? I mean, it can be an easy transition when the Mashiach comes, or it can be pestilence and war.
Well, the basic idea is, again, for why this fits perfect with Chesed, the basic idea is if humanity listens to the lessons that God has tried to give us about what it is to live a good life, what it is to create a just and kind society, then by the time Mashiach shows up, there's not going to be much work for him to do. And there won't be any like dragging or kicking and screaming. It's, the analogy might be like going to the dentist.
Hey.
If you brush your teeth, if you floss regularly, you stay away from sugary foods, then when you go to the dentist, it's going to be a zip zam zoom, a quick polish, and everything's fine. But if you just let your teeth go to rot, you don't take care of them, then when you go to the dentist, and may God have mercy on you, and you go to a good dentist like Bernie, you're still going to be sitting in that chair a long time. And there's going to be a lot of drilling and a lot of filling that needs to go on to repair the damage of what you've done. And that's really, Michael, as you say, the vision for the end is we can do the work now, incrementally and personally, or else if we are completely stubborn and refuse to let go of our pettiness, our selfishness, and our meanness, then it will be pried from our fingers through turmoil and pain until we can get to the other side.
If we don't do the acts of loving kindness and do what we're supposed to do, and
we take the hard way.
we take the hard way, will the Mashiach still come?
Yes. So there's another long discussion in the Talmud about, do we have to earn the Mashiach, or is the Mashiach just pre-scheduled? Yeah. And the answer is yes. Which is to say that if we do the right things, not just we individually, but we the whole world, that this vision will come sooner rather than later. But if we don't, if we just carry on in our own ways and never improve, God has still said that Mashiach will come. So one way or another, we will get there. It's just one way is much better than the other.
And at the same time, once the Mashiach comes, are you going to be a follower, or are you going to be left behind? And the follower is the person who does the acts of goodwill and loving kindness. Yes, Marian? The skeptic of the...
I'm not 100% sure what that's referring to in the bullet point, to be honest. There's a lot of disagreement about exactly how the resurrection will take place of the dead. There's a lot of disagreement about the details, the finer points of the end of days chronology. Certainly, Hillel believed in the promise of the eternity of the soul. Finally say that, yeah. That the soul is eternal, and he certainly believed that the Mashiach would one day come. So I'm not 100% sure which points was meant by that bullet point.
I'm led to believe it deals with the return from people from the grave. Steve.
Last bullet.
Well, the unfortunate poor, and people in the time of the Mashiach won't be waxing rich. And so there's going to be haves and have-nots.
There'll be haves and have-nots balanced by Chesed and Tzedakah. That is to say, not that they'll be continued to be ignored, but the rabbis were very clear that our vision of the Messiah coming and of peace on earth is not there's going to be gold raining from the sky and just food under every rock and everything's going to be idyllic Garden of Eden. Natural laws will still be enforced, which means you'll still have to work. There still can be, trouble getting your crops in. You still might have, not enough to take care of yourself for any number of reasons. And therefore, poverty is still possible. But of course, the antidote to poverty we already have, which is Chesed and Tzedakah.
But if sin is abolished, which is sin entered when Adam and Eve.
No, there's nothing about sin, just day to day, this bad stuff you do.
Wouldn't it go back to Gan Eden? I thought the time of the Messiah was like Gan Eden restored.
We talk about the spiritual existence after our death, the non-material messianic age, the spiritual as being like the Garden of Eden. But the physical world, after the Messiah has come and everyone is doing what they should and the world is fine, is still a physical world. It still follows the normal natural laws of the world. And the sin that's being talked about there is not any inherited sin. individual decisions to sin. I'll no longer beat you up and take your stuff. I'll no longer.
The work was the curse of.
This is a much longer conversation.
Yeah, Eden,
Yeah.
Eden providing everything. Not everything will still.
Man had to till the ground. That was
Right.
his punishment.
Kind of, and also it was a time-limited punishment that most Jewish authorities say already expired. The idea was that at the time of Noah, that punishment was done. But like I said, it's a much longer conversation. So it's not the usual story that we hear from pop culture, from the general society. Judaism has its own spin on what that punishment meant and whether or not the terms were still in effect.
So will we have a class on those two things which we're talking about?
One of the best things about this class is that a lot of people have made it clear what they would like to study about. We definitely have the what happens after you die class now that we need to get scheduled, and the what happens in the end of days material side while you're still alive, but the Messiah is here and all of that. So yes, I will talk with the Education Committee and we will find a time when we can cover this. It's good to have people already interested in the topic. We don't have to advertise as much though.
It'll be a long session.
Yes.
Rewarding at that.
You'll still leave with questions, I can guarantee it. Yes, I
Yeah.
never promise all the answers, just a few.
It feels good to learn.
Yeah.
So we've got some handouts, and
Handouts are up.
our next presentation.
Next presentation is Kathy Squirtlow.
Oh, wonderful.
On to Ferret on beauty, splendor.
So we talked
Should
about
be sweet.
Art and music and all the other ways that that beauty gets reflected in Judaism.
So my thanks to you all, and my thanks to Mike for putting this together. Thank you. Hopefully.
That was a good show.
Well, thank you. Barry, you're sweet.
Proved really